Thank you all so much for being here. My name is Karen Tucker, as my colleague Marcia so adeptly said 5 minutes ago. And we have a very special treat this morning in that we get to hear from Andy Cunningham and Paul Wiefels with some of their observations about marketing today, some of the trends, what their implications are, what seems to be heading in a right direction, what maybe needs a quarter turn to the left or the right. So we'll be hearing that very soon. Their full bios are in your printed programs, so I won't go over that. And we owe a debt of gratitude to our host and sponsor today, Fenwick & West. We really, really appreciate them opening their doors to us. Thank you, Fenwick. Just a few words about Churchill Club. We have proudly served for over 3 decades of incredible change here in the Silicon Valley and Greater Bay Area region. Our devotion is to encouraging innovation, economic growth, and societal benefit. We consider ourselves to be forward-leaning relative to how we approach topics. And then what that means is, what are the implications of trends today for innovation, for economic growth, et cetera? So we're not just holding something under a microscope, we're looking at what we think it means, looking forward. We always ask our speakers not to pitch or promote, and that's another hallmark of Churchill Club. We hope that if you're not following us, you'll plug into LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, or you can always just get on our mailing list by talking to the people at the front desk. And by the way, the hashtag for today is Churchill Club. So thanks very much for your attention. Let's now give a very warm welcome to our speakers, Andy and Paul.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming today.
Hi, everyone.
I have to use this one because I'm wearing a dress, and I always forget that microphones don't work with dresses, these kinds. So anyway.
I wore mine underneath.
Yes. So I'm going to just start off by saying that Paul and I have been in this business, the marketing business, for a long time, and we recently reconnected and got into this big discussion about the art and science of marketing and how much is too much art and how much is too much science and what's the right balance look like and that sort of thing. So we got into this discussion about kind of what I called weird science. Anybody see that movie, Weird Science? So if you have too much science, it gets weird, right? You know, it just gets very weird. But if you don't have enough science, especially in today's era, it's too fluffy. So what's the right balance between the science and the art? It's important to have both of those things because it's what companies need. And we worry, both Paul and I worry, that in today's era, people are relying too much on technology and not enough on art and strategy. And so we're here to sort of put a flag up for the strategy side of the equation. So the science has got to inform the art. That's definitely got to happen. But we want to make sure that there's a balance between the two. So with that, I'm going to let Paul talk to you a little bit about what we've been calling the left brain, right, Paul?
The left brain, yes, exactly. So one of the theses that we started off with when Andy and I first started this discussion was this notion that what is the last thing to be automated? What is the last business process to be automated? And it turns out it's marketing, right? Now, given that this is Silicon Valley, what can be done can also be overdone. And that's exactly what's happening. Okay? So in 2011, the people that put on the MarTech conference, first of all, there didn't used to be a MarTech conference.
Or MarTech.
Or MarTech, right, exactly. You need one before you can have the other. By the way, the conference people make the most money at this in all of these sorts of things. So how many people went to MarTech this past year? There's hope yet. Good. Well, how many people went to RSA? Big cybersecurity conference, okay? All right, well, you should go to that.
Or Dreamforce.
Yeah.
How about Dreamforce?
How about Dreamforce, right.
For the music?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Well, one of the things that we saw over the last 5 years or so, and I've been kind of keeping my eye on this, and I'll give you a couple of anecdotal stories as we go along here, but one of the things that the conference MarTech folks said was that In 2011, there was 150 marketing technology firms, marketing technology companies built around the world. Any clue on how many there are now, according to this? 5,000 firms. 5,000 companies doing marketing technology. Now, if you want to know what crazy looks like, that's it right there. That is completely unsustainable. It's unsustainable for those firms. It's unsustainable for the customers that are adopting that kind of stuff, right?
And you can't have that many analytics, right?
You can't have, no. I mean,
ridiculous.
If you go back to the fundamental notion that software is supposed to automate things, software is supposed to take away friction, how does 5,000 companies take away friction?
You know, I was working with a telecoms company down in Santa Clara a couple of years ago, and when I first started working with the CEO, he handed me a little booklet that was stapled together, and it was probably, I'm going to say 10 or 12 pages long. Each page had a different dashboard, several different dashboards on it. There were probably 40 or 50 different dashboards on it, and he kind of threw it across the table at me, and he said, "My marketing people tell me we're doing really well, and that's what these analytics say, but I know we're not. We're losing sales." So it doesn't even necessarily do the job it's supposed to do.
Yeah, I think there's so much focus on what the dashboard says. And as any pilot will tell you, when do wrecks, when do plane crashes happen? When do these terrible tragedies happen? Well, in commercial aviation, one of my brothers is a airline pilot. His point is that people, when a commercial airliner gets into trouble, the pilots are too busy trying to diagnose what's wrong instead of flying the plane. And they literally lose sight of how the plane is supposed to operate. And I wonder, to Andy's point, if that's what we're doing right now as marketers. We're too busy looking at the dashboards and we're not thinking enough about how the plane is actually flying.
Exactly. What is the strategy? And strategy is something that requires a little bit of art, a little bit of science, and experience. We like to talk about experience, right? But yeah, you have to think through these problems before you apply the right solutions to them.
So one of the things that we do is to ask, before we start looking at all of this technology, before we start looking at how to automate a marketing process, what would be the first question you want to ask? What's the strategy, right?
Yeah, or what's the problem? Well, let's start with that, right?
What's the problem that we're trying to solve for?
And what's the strategy to solve it?
Yeah. What's the ultimate goal of marketing?
That's
Buy
it.
more stuff.
Sell more stuff.
Sell more stuff, right? It's really not that mysterious, okay? The goal of marketing is to sell more stuff. And in technology, 50-mile radius of this building, right? There's a lot of problems that happen in Silicon Valley. I mean, these companies are really hard to operate, as Andy and I both know. What makes problems go away? Selling more stuff.
Success, right.
More sales.
But one of the things that Paul and I talked about, remember, Paul, is that disconnect between marketing and sales that seems to be happening all over the place right now, and it's very dangerous.
Why do you think that is? What's been
I
your
think
experience?
marketing people have overcomplicated the situation to the point. I'm working with a sales team right now with a big company up in San Ramon, and the sales guys keep telling me I don't have enough time, and I don't have the bandwidth to tell that long of a story. I have to have a story that's like this, not a story that is like this. So I don't know, but they want to tell their own story and they don't want to listen to marketing. I mean, how many people are in sales in the audience here? Anybody in sales? Maybe you can help us with this problem. Yes. What do you think?
Well, I tend to agree. I think that marketing organizations are too busy putting together. They fall into the trap of the persona, right? How many companies here use personas? How many people here in companies use personas, right? How many personas do you have, or does your company have? 4. Who can top 4?
Oh,
Karen. I've got 4, I've got 6, who can talk? I've seen companies we have 12 personas. Sales guys, do 12 personas work for you? No, they don't. Why not? Yeah.
Right, you're trying to sell something, right? You're trying to connect with that individual, yeah.
Yeah, you're trying to fly the plane, right? So I think there's one thing that again, marketers tend to overcomplicate this situation. Now, to be fair, sales tends to undercomplicate it a bit. If you just stand on your head and do this, it'll all work out. And by the way, it's software, so. So the notion that you have to understand what it is that the problem that you're trying to solve, I think, is one of the major factors to that.
Right. Identify why something isn't selling or why you're not getting traction.
Yeah. One of the things that we ask clients is, can you put your value proposition on one piece of paper, right?
Better yet, in a paragraph.
Yeah, or in a paragraph, and not in 9-point type. So 3 questions that you have to ask that we find don't get asked enough, or the answers to them are not very precise and not very elegant. They tend to be long-winded, but they're not elegant. And that is, where are you going to compete? How are you going to compete? And the third one that never gets asked, how are you going to win? And the where and the how get answered to great degree. It's the how, or the last part, the how you can win. That's the part that doesn't get asked enough. And
the part that technology doesn't solve either,
Yeah,
by the way.
that is the
It can measure whether you're doing it or not, but it can't actually tell you how to win.
yeah. So I think those kinds of disconnects are happening between sales organizations and marketing organizations. You
had that great line, and I love it. The what, the so what, the now what, and then I added the what if.
What if, right.
Which is a very good sequence to go through, I think.
Yeah.
Want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So the what is basically, what is it that we're trying to convey to people, right? What is the benefit that we're trying to convey? By the way, we believe that you choose a benefit, you then create the mechanism for delivering that benefit, and then you communicate and convey that benefit. Now that's very different than in Silicon Valley, where we made it, now you guys go out and sell it. That worked, and it still works for very nascent startups. That worked. This is a very mature industry now in technology, or technology-enabled companies. So the what now, or the so what is the part that, okay, now can you uniquely express that in a very, very compressed and, again, I call it elegant way. And it's the now what do you want us to do about it that doesn't get asked.
Right, exactly. Maybe I can talk a little bit about the right brain side of things, is what happens when you, with the what now, right, the what now. So some of you might know that I just recently did a book on the topic of positioning. And one of the things that I've noticed over the course of my career is that most companies don't do positioning. They do something that they call branding. And branding is usually the art. Usually it's an art, and it has to do with design and logos and taglines and color palettes and brand attributes and brand personality and brand drivers. Those are all what I call the emotional side of a company. But companies are a lot like people, and they also have a rational side. And that rational side should be a description of your role and relevance in the marketplace. And what I find is that most companies don't understand their role and relevance. They can't answer those 2 simple questions: who are you and why do you matter? So what we think is that you should start with a positioning exercise to answer the questions: who are you and why do you matter? And then add on to it the emotional side with the brand part of it, and then together you create a whole company, a single unit.
Does positioning, explain what your definition of positioning, Andy. What do you mean by that?
I'm going to steal an old definition of positioning because I think it was really good. Did anybody read Jack Trout and Al Reese's book called Positioning? It was written in the 70s. It's still a really good business book, and it was, and I think it still may even be a bestseller. Their definition of, they actually invented the term positioning, and they they defined it as a space in the brain of a potential customer. In other words, real estate in the mind of a potential customer that is devoted to your product or service. But back when Jack and Al wrote that book, they actually only had one, maybe two vehicles to deliver positioning messages to the outside world, the primary one being advertising, which is what they talked about. And advertising, as we all know, A, it's expensive, but B, it is also, you have complete control over it. You can say whatever you want to say. We're now living in a world where other people get to say what they want to say about your product and service, and it's a whole different ballgame. So authenticity has become a whole lot more important about what your position is. It's not just about defining space in someone's head, it's about defining space in a market. It's about defining a white space in the marketplace. So we like to start with understanding who you are as a company, and we call it corporate DNA. And I think there are three kinds of companies. There's customer-focused companies, product-focused companies, and concept-focused companies, and they all operate very differently. I gave them the nicknames mothers, mechanics, and missionaries, but whatever the nickname is, they measure success differently, they structure themselves differently, they hire different kinds of people, and once you know what kind of a company you are, you can create much more authentic messaging from it. Again, just like people. You know, when I was a kid, I took ballet lessons. I wanted to be a ballerina. But do I look like a ballerina? No. I'm not tall, I'm not thin, I'm not blonde. So therefore, I can't be a ballerina. So I have this phrase, and then I'll turn it back to you, Paul, but I have this notion that if you know what you're made of, as a human or a company, if you know what you're made of, you can make something of it. And that's what companies should be doing too.
Between those three ideas, the concept, the product, or the mechanics, the mothers, because I think of them that way.
You start with the mechanics, yeah,
exactly.
I know. All the men do.
Exactly. I start with the mechanics. How different does, in your opinion, does the marketing, the active marketing change for each of those kinds of companies? What has to be emphasized, what doesn't? What has to be de-emphasized?
I think, again, I think it really needs to be a very authentic discussion. So some of you may have seen the new advertising campaign from Comcast. Anybody see the new advertising campaign? They are really working very hard and spending a lot of money to convince all of you that they are a customer-focused company. How many of you think they are a customer-focused company? Okay. Karen's had a good experience with Comcast. You should write them a letter. You can be on their next commercial. But
That'll be the fifth letter.
They are trying, but they started talking about it before they achieved the effect, and that's the point. Is you need to market from a point of authenticity in today's world.
Yep.
Otherwise, you get people laughing about the efforts that you're making in a new area.
Yeah, I noticed that with the Super Bowl. How many people watched the Super Bowl this year? Yeah, a lot of people did. How many people watch it for the game or watch it for the advertising? Well, this year the game far outsurpassed the advertising. I wrote an article right afterwards. I was sitting watching it with a bunch of guys that have been in advertising before. We all started our careers in that. And we were all faintly nauseous after most of these commercials. And I called it inauthentic attempts to try to be authentic. And Comcast was at the front of the list, as was Dodge Ram, as was Toyota, as was a bunch of companies that are trying to hook their product to some thematic meme. And people see right through that. It's about as transparent as a pane of glass. And we just wonder, I wonder, why people are spending money against that relative to what Andy was just talking about in social media, where it is so easy to be called out on something like that. Martin Luther King has what to do with Dodge Ram pickup trucks. That's absurd. Okay? Somebody should be sacked over that. Okay? Some marketing VP should get canned. If that's your idea of a good idea, man, you're in the wrong business.
You know, it's funny. It used to be that running marketing, especially in a consumer company, was all about winning awards for your ads. And today it's really about demand generation, right? That's the even no matter what, even if you're B2B or B2C, don't you think?
Well, I do, but I'll argue as Apple's advertising manager long ago, you can win awards and stimulate demand, and those are not mutually exclusive ideas or mutually exclusive activities.
You can do both, but most of my clients are B2B companies, and they don't have any money to spend on advertising.
Right, and nor probably should they, to the extent that there are advertising for certain categories can be an extremely efficient way to reach people. Believe it or not, the Super Bowl is an efficient way to reach people. It's just a question of who you are to be in that situation. Who knows the company Squarespace? Okay. Did you see their commercial on the Super Bowl? That one amazed me. That one just amazed me. A web developer? I don't know. I don't get that one. But anyway,
I missed the Super Bowl so I didn't get
not
to
to
see
dwell
that.
on the Super Bowl.
Well,
So going back to my original question, when you look at these three different kinds of companies, these three different kinds of DNA, are there differences in what they have to do relative to positioning themselves or marketing themselves?
yeah, I think they should start, if you're a customer-focused company, let's say you're Lyft. Lyft is a very customer-focused company. Uber is not. And you can kind of feel that in the marketplace, right? And so what Lyft does is everything they do is focused on the customer experience, training their people, decorating their cars. That's what the pink mustache was all about. And when Uber was having all of those issues, I think they're over now, are they? Well, no, they're not over yet. Okay, well, as they have these issues, Lyft is leveraging their customer focus against Uber's negative positioning with customers. So you focus, if you're a customer-focused company, you focus on customer relationships and customer experience and the segment of the customers you're after. If you're a mechanic or a product-oriented company, you focus on your features or the value that you're bringing to the marketplace. And if you are a concept company like Apple or Tesla or FedEx or Starbucks, those kinds of companies, where you exist to change behavior on a fundamental level, you're focusing often on the next big thing, or sometimes you're focusing on a cult of personality. And I think Richard Branson is a great example of a cult of personality who creates companies around the cult of personality, not necessarily around the next big thing.
Is there a fourth kind of company? When you were doing your research for your book, is there a fourth one?
You know, actually, I think there is a fourth one, and I found it. I discovered it too late to put it into the book. But the fourth kind of company, so this is a secret preview on so you've got mothers, mechanics, and missionaries. So, of course, I had to come up with an M, and it's miners, and meaning companies that mine customers for share of wallet across many different things. Alibaba is a great example of this. Tencent is a great example of this. Yandex is a good example of this. So I wish that I had discovered it, but when I do my update on the book, I'm going to talk about 4 kinds of companies, and one is a miner. And this is the first time I've ever said that to anybody other than you.
Okay. All right. Well, see, as a management consultant, a miner sounds to me like a company that would try to undistort demand. Right? In other words, where demand has been artificially constrained by supply chain, where by pricing, by what have you, the ability to somebody to consume it, is a miner somebody who comes in and says, we're going to make this consumable any way you want to consume it. We're going to unconstrain the supply chain for this, meaning you can get it anywhere you want.
Well, we're gonna sell you all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
We're looking for share of wallet, whatever, right? All kinds of stuff. And Amazon is one of these companies, yeah. But Alibaba actually does it the best. They really understand how to connect users through different communities. That's really the secret of a good miner. Is they connect users through many different communities. And Amazon hasn't quite done the community thing yet. They probably will, I imagine. Don't you think?
Yeah, I think so as well. I think. Just if I can provide an opinion on that, on Amazon. Amazon, to me, from a investment thesis, is the next Berkshire Hathaway. So if you buy a share of Amazon today, I wonder what Amazon's going to be worth 20 years from now. Okay, if you bought Berkshire Hathaway 25 years ago, you'd be very wealthy right now. Yeah. Yeah.
That's an interesting perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think there is a lot to that idea of mining and putting together like-minded companies. What I think is amazing to me when I looked at the potential power of it was their announcement, Amazon's announcement along with J.P. Morgan and Berkshire about going into the healthcare business. Now, they were talking about going into the healthcare business for their own companies. And what happened to healthcare stocks? What happened to Anthem, right? 5% drop that day. Couldn't happen to a nicer people, right? So I think the mining idea is an example of, from a marketing perspective, where there is an artificially constrained supply or artificially regulated demand, that's going to strip it away.
I totally think you're right. You know, there's a book out there called The Content Trap. Anybody heard of this book? It's written by a Harvard Business School professor, and I forget his name. But I've read the book, and that's actually where I discovered this minor kind of company. They talk about it through terms of content, which I think is a little convolutes the matter. But basically, it's companies who mine your wallet for many different products and services, and they build communities around those products and services, and then connect those communities and create what we're calling today a hub economy, which is kind of where things are going. Karen wanted to make sure we talked about where things are going. The new business model for companies are hubs. So we went from networks to now hubs, and hubs come from networks, but it's about building hubs around the most popular node in a network and creating hubs that way, and creating value, but also capturing value. Two different ways of making money.
Yeah, I think so. And to be fair to certain people in the audience, I think there was somebody here from, there's some SAP people here. Is there anybody here from Ariba? Okay, an SAP company. Ariba probably was the first hub. Okay, it was called a procurement hub at the time.
Yeah.
We know because they were clients.
Me too.
Right? And that was a novel idea, but it didn't work because it didn't work to the extent that it could, because the ability for it to be networked didn't really exist.
Right, you need the two sides.
You need the two sides.
And they have to be
exactly.
connected to each other.
So you get out with another marketing problem that we find is that people get out in front of their own headlights, right, relative to the marketing promise. But nothing smells like failure more than not being able to do something that was just promised to you to do it. And again, that used to be standard operating procedure, I think, in technology and in technology-based marketing, right? And we had all the cliches associated with it. How do you know when a software salesman is lying? Watch his lips, right? It's that kind of thing. Her lips now. The notion that, installation is not the same as utilization, all of these things, that's all gone by the wayside, or it's going by the wayside. Now, companies still get trapped in those ideas and that way of thinking, but this kind of information flow that marketers are taking in, I wonder if it's going back out and actually telling the truth in an authentic way so that we set people's expectations accordingly. I think we're still a little bit trapped in the don't look there, look over here.
Right. But I think sometimes when you're not looking over here, companies are actually inventing new business models. And I've done a little bit of work recently looking at Google and their autonomous car efforts. And what Google is actually trying to do, why would Google get into the autonomous car business? Can you imagine? The reason that they're getting into autonomous cars is that they are working with advertisers who are going to take people for free in those cars to their restaurants, to their spas, to their destination points. So the money is still an ad model. So that's kind of going on over here. It's like, don't look over here at our new business model. We're creating value over here. But look over here at this technology that we're creating, the autonomous vehicle. So it's fascinating what companies are doing with what we're calling linkages between their assets and how they're making those things work. So
I think to go back to the notion and we'll take some questions here in a few minutes, but to go back to the notion of this marketing automation screed that I was on a few minutes ago, all of these MarTech companies are chopped up into these various little categories because that's the only way that we can keep track of it all, right? And again, I've asked clients, how many of these things do you have? And the biggest answer that I've gotten is we have 20 of these packages in our firm, and we're, albeit a marketing-sensitive firm, $6 billion company, and what have you. But I'll never forget, several years ago, we were doing work for a very, very high-growth client, whose name I will not repeat, but they were growing faster than a weed. And this is about a $50 million company going up to about a $150 million company. And they had rows of people, marketing, head of marketing we'd done work for in the past. They had rows of people, millennials, sitting at tables, and they're all looking at screens. And I asked several of them, because I would come into the office and sit with them, what are you doing? Well, I'm looking at Tableau, I'm monitoring Twitter feeds, right? Now, you walk into the reception, and here's big screens up there with Twitter feeds going across it. This is a business-to-business play. This is application performance management software. Is that really so interesting on Twitter? I don't know, maybe, I guess, if you're in DevOps or something like that. But they were spending all of their time monitoring this stuff. And I asked a question of a couple of them. I said, you ever been out with the salespeople? No. I asked the marketing director, you ever send these kids out with the salespeople? Why would we do that? I just wanted to shoot myself. I mean, I really did. It's like, well, maybe simply because those are the people that are actually partying with their money to buy stuff?
Right.
Come on.
They're actual humans.
They're actually humans. Yeah, they go to the wallet, right? You don't get that on a Twitter feed.
Right.
That's not marketing to me. I'm sorry.
So that actually is a great segue into one of my favorite myths that we were talking about, which is demand gen is a technology.
Yes.
Myth or truth, right? No, that's a myth.
Yeah. Yeah.
Technology can measure demand gen, and it can take a customer through the funnel once it's in the funnel, but demand gen itself from the get-go is not a technology.
And in fact, let's play hit or myth. Okay? I'm going to read, Andy, I'll take the first one. It's better to be better than it is to be first. Hit or myth? It's better to be better than it is to be first. How many people believe that? How many people disbelieve it? Tell me why.
Because Google was the 7th search engine. Philo T. Farnsworth was the inventor of television, and everyone knows about RCA. You go all down the list. It usually takes 15 or 20 years from the time something is developed in the lab to the time it becomes a commercial success, and the inventors and engineers are the ones who get the arrows in the back and are dead. You never hear about it.
So that would argue for the better side.
Yes.
Who can argue for the first side? It's better to be first. Pretty good first. Yep, pretty good first.
The back of the room can't hear what the guys in the front of the room said. So to summarize your point, you said that pioneers are the ones with arrows in their backs, and they're the ones lying dead on the road to the success of the third or fourth or fifth company that comes along afterwards.
I think the only argument for first is it gives you a head start on becoming better.
Interesting. That's a good point. What do you
would
think? You know what I think, actually, Paul? I think that being first or being better isn't really either one of them is the key. I think capturing the imagination of the market that is going to buy that, and you might not be better, and you might not be first, but you might be.
Yeah, I would argue that both of them, I mean, you could make the case either way. I would make the case that it's better to be the most relevant.
Yes, exactly.
Okay? Whether you're first or better, you can certainly be first, but you can't be better unless you're relevant, right? Because now we're relevant, we're better against what?
And what do you need to do to be relevant, Paul? Develop your positioning.
Developing your positioning, yes. I knew you were going to say that. Okay, how about another one? Categories can be created, and it's not really that hard.
Anybody try to build a new category? Yes, everybody wants to do that.
Yeah.
Every company I walk into, they want to build a new category.
Yes.
And their category is, my product is really faster. Really faster. That's the new category.
Yeah, I've argued before that if your category sucks, you by definition suck too. Okay? So you might want to try to at least resegment your category or look for some other thing about what your category is. but that's really hard to do. It's actually easier to do in B2C than it is in B2B, right? In B2B, we have too many people, like Gartner to a 0.9 confidence level telling us what categories there are and what have you. In B2C, right, one of the great category inventions of all time, I know this will surprise you, Swiffer. Okay? Swiffer was invented an entire billion-dollar category.
That's a great one.
That's what P&G does.
You know who else is a good example of a company that resegmented the categories? Chrysler with the minivan. And it was actually born out of a problem, which is sometimes, necessity is the mother of invention. And they had a chassis and not enough cars to put on it, so they created this idea of the minivan, and it became a huge hit and a whole new category.
Now we differentiate on cup holders.
Right. Can I do one myth?
Yes.
I got to do it because I'm not sure we have enough time to do too many more. But this is my favorite myth of all, which is if I build it, they will come. If they don't come, it's because I don't have enough PR.
Is that a hit or a myth?
How many times I've heard that in the marketplace, I cannot tell you. So what do you think? If I build it, will they come? How many are engineers in the audience? You believe that, right? No, you've had too much experience to believe that. But that is what happens all the time, is companies believe that if they build it, people will just come, beat a path to their door. And then, of course, as a former PR person, the reason they're not beating a path to their door, and the reason we got a lot of business in the day, was because they didn't get enough PR.
Yes, as I told my CEO at one point when I was on the operating side, he says, "How come we don't get more PR?" I said, "Because we don't deserve more PR." Right?
Oh, they love to hear that.
Yeah, he was put off by that.
But back in the day, when you got PR,
Yeah.
if you got a Wall Street Journal article or a Forbes article or something, you could get reprints of it and put it in your sales kits, and it lasted at least 2 or 3 months.
And there was these great big thick magazines that followed technology.
That's right. And people carried them around and
Right,
showed them to customers.
They needed stories, and so somebody could walk down the hall, and the PR department would put out a press release about it, right? So and so walked down the hall, and
Exactly.
more to come.
And today, the news lasts about as long as the notification shows up on your phone, which you can't really walk into a sales call with. See this notification? We got into the Wall Street Journal. See this? It just doesn't last as long anymore. So PR doesn't have the same value it once had. There's a whole new way of doing PR, and we don't have time to talk about that. We'll do that at another time. But the whole notion of getting press to sell product is not the answer.
So we want to turn this open to Q&A and make this a much more interactive session than perhaps it is right now. But just to kind of wrap up, where Andy and I are coming from and what we're interested in pursuing is this notion that marketing is still an art and a science, and that the science cannot overcome the art, the deficiencies in the art. And right now, what we see in technology notably, because that's what we're all involved with around here, but other categories as well, that notion that the science can make up for a deficient value proposition or a deficient product or a deficient service, or frankly, a deficient business model, now you have what computer scientists would call a garbage in, garbage out problem, right? And so that's not going to work. The 5,000 MarTech companies, in my opinion, that's going to be a massive consolidation, and it will be just as ugly as the other software consolidations that have happened in this industry.
Put your investment into Amazon, not the MarTech companies, is what you're saying.
Put your investment in Amazon, exactly. And then the last point that I would do is, start with strategy. Start with strategy. Everything has to start with strategy. That's not a mystical idea, by the way, right? Strategy is nothing more than a set of assumptions, right? You're going to go out and test those assumptions and see which ones and see what works and see what doesn't, and then migrate that. Instead, what we do is we write marketing plans. What happens to those marketing plans? We write them all the time. We help our clients write marketing plans, or sometimes we get fed up with it and we just do it ourselves, right? And then what do they do with it? Stick it on the shelf. That's the end of that. Let's go do some personas. It's more fun.
Yes.
Parting thoughts?
Yeah, I think the whole idea of technology is great for measurement, and it's great for giving you more information and more data. But strategy is all about connecting dots that other people aren't connecting. And it takes a special kind of brain to do that. It also takes some experience to do that, but it takes observing the world in a different way. And having been lucky enough to spend time working with Steve Jobs in the early days, he was a master at connecting dots that normal people didn't connect. And when you can connect those dots and create a path towards the purchase of a product, that's when strategy reigns supreme. And then you can use technology to measure how successful you're doing or to give you more tools to sell it. But that's my thing is about connecting dots.
And having worked with Steve Jobs as well, one of Steve's great comments was, it's not the consumer's job to know what he or she wants, okay? It's your job. Go figure that out. Marketing automation won't do that for you.
I remember Steve used to say, we don't need no stinking market research. Okay, with
We
that.
needed a little bit. But
A little bit, yeah. Okay, should we do a Q&A? And Karen, what's the process for Q&A? Do you want us to call on people, or do you want... oh, he's got a microphone.
Yeah.
Personal.
Okay, the
I got the
person with the
microphone,
microphone.
so I get
Okay, and
the
there's
first
some...
one.
Okay, there's someone with a mic.
So Michael Fonseca, I'm working for Rakuten Marketing. Rakuten is one of those mining companies, by the way, in Japan. We've been earlier than Alibaba and better, but anyway.
Yes.
So better and first. But our company is a performance advertising company, so I don't even know where to start answering questions to you guys. But one of the things we see, and I want to understand your take on it, every time we automate the optimization of ads, just take that one thing. Beautiful creatives versus creatives that work. The ones that work are created by the machines, not by the people. So how do you deal with that evidence?
Well, you know, my point of view, and then Paul, you should say yours, but my point of view is that marketing is not a creative exercise in any way. It's a strategy exercise. And so
Branding's creative.
branding is creative, exactly. So if you want to win awards, or you want to be sexy, or you want to be, you know, stand out in some sort of way, then that's when creatives do a really great job. But, you know, yeah, technology is doing a good job of finding the right words and the right messages that work. And now we have all this technology that can test these messages, which is also a valuable thing. But remember what Steve Jobs said, right? Which is, you don't really know what you want until I tell you. And so a little bit of that arrogance is not so bad in a company, I think.
Well, beyond the depressing notion of what you just said, I think, you know, the first thing I would say is make the logo bigger, right? So that's...
Make it red.
Yeah, right. Honestly, I don't know. I mean, I do, but you know, you get into personalization, you get into all of the kinds of techniques. Personalization would be a big one. I have a lot of experience in that area, whereby you can actually, an algorithm will do a better job. I think Andy's point is the more germane point, though. It all has to start with a strategy. It all has to start with something that really is intrinsically valuable to somebody. And then getting them to buy it, whether they buy it 2 times a week, 3 times a week, or, you know, whether they're habitual, which would be important for Rakuten, that I think is where the technology can play a role.
Jeff, you have a mic?
Yes.
Then I'll get you.
I'm Jeff. I work for a small company called SAP. And I want to just make a point about Ariba, and that it is an enormously successful hub and network, and it creates trillions of dollars of value. Am I right? I mean, I don't know what the exact number is, but it's phenomenal and it's very little known.
Yes.
I had the opportunity of growing up. Actually, I learned marketing and communications from Andy, but I've been in communications, marketing, sales, development at SAP, and I had the opportunity to do 12-month fellowship in sales, and it changed my whole perspective of marketing.
Wow.
Because of the gap. And there's, in a company like SAP, 85,000 people creating content for you poor guys on the front lines doesn't work. Because we think at the core we know what the answer is, and we don't. And there's an enormous gap, and we're all working very hard to figure out how to close that.
And you know what, Jeff? I think that's the next frontier for marketing. Oh, perfect. But that's the next frontier, is how do we close the gap between marketing and sales? Cool. Now I know you had a question.
Yes, thank you. So I'm actually interested about the whole category creation. My name is Eduardo, and I have a company that provides photo editing services. And I'm interested in how you guys think of Uber and Airbnb, who created categories and things that really didn't make sense, right? I mean, how many of us thought that we were going to get in someone else's car and let them drive us, especially if we're a woman? And how many of us thought that we were going to get in someone else's apartment and be there? And yet they created these categories against the grain. And my issue is most people think of, I'm going to edit my photos myself with Photoshop or with an app versus we provide a service. And so we're also in that situation, which how do you create a category? So I'm interested in how you guys think of the Uber and the Airbnb creation, and specifically the early stages, because that's kind of where we are right now.
Well, I would think about it, again, kind of in management consulting-ese. I would think about it as two things. First of all, they disintermediated a constrained supply that is guild-like in its orientation. Okay, number one. Both of those industries, by the way. Number two, there was way more demand for this constrained supply than we gave credence to, right? A hotel company is only looking at demand relative to the real estate that it holds. So, or the brand that it commands, right? So if I'm a boutique hotel, then I'm, you know, my demand for that is constrained relative to the people that are going to stay at my $1,000 a night boutique hotel. Airbnb and Uber just blew through those entire ideas, right? Airbnb is the largest provider of out-of-home sleeping experience in the world. Okay? And yet they have no hotel rooms. Okay? Uber's the biggest transportation provider in the world, and yet they own no rolling stock.
And they're breaking a lot of glass along the way, which I think is a great thing, by the way. When you're innovating, you got to break glass, because otherwise it's not gonna stick. But note that neither Airbnb nor Uber were the first in that market.
Correct, yeah.
So you've been waiting for a question.
Yeah, also not being the first in marketing. Good marketing is worth its weight in gold, and I've followed what you did for a long time, and I wrote for Upside magazine. Your company's always had something special. I don't know if you want to reveal the special sauce, but it was Intel and Microsoft, and I went to the Intel developer conferences and Microsoft hardware engineering conference for 14 years. So you knew it was Intel and Microsoft. How did you get Cisco to be in the same breath with them when the company should have been 3Com and Bob Metcalf who invented it? And that's why I say it's not the guy who invents it, it's the first great marketer with a good company, and that's why Cisco. I think that was your deal.
It was. I'll just quickly say what we did there is we saw first of all, John Chambers is an amazing CEO to work with. And he came to us and he said, I want to be something more than a hub and router company. And I understand that being that is about marketing. So that was the good news. We had somebody to work with who was a real advocate. But what we did is we saw this internet thing kind of happening, and we saw that it was going to become the third thing that people were going to be talking about, in addition to hardware, which was Intel's purview, software, which was Microsoft's purview, and then there was this internet thing happening, and nobody owned it. So we saw an opportunity for Cisco to own the internet through the plumbing concept, if you will, and created a three-legged stool for the industry. So one of the very simple tactics we did is we said to John, let's look at your calendar and take everything off your speaking calendar that doesn't have Andy Grove or Bill Gates in it. So you're only going to show up on stage when it's Andy Grove and Bill Gates. So we created this sort of three-legged stool concept, and actually the press came up with this little phrase. They called it Wintelco, Windows, Cisco, Intel. And it was that came from the press, but the idea was to create this new three-legged stool where Cisco played a role. And I have to give John, I just spoke with John just a couple days ago. He was just the most amazing person to work for to make something like that happen. So thank you. That was a very nice question.
I'd like to ask a question in regard to your basic thesis of art or science. How do you get that into the academic literature? I'm professor of professor emeritus marketing from Rochester Institute of Technology. For years, I've talked your talk, and I began every marketing course the way you would begin a marketing course. But if you take a look at the marketing literature, Kotler may have a section. Is it a science, or is it something else? How do you get that into the academic literature so that younger people coming up understand this at an earlier age? Give you an example. I have a grandson who's going to work for a online marketing firm selling furniture. And I said, well, you're going into the retailing business. Oh, no, I'm not going to the retailing business. I'm going to do analytics, okay? So, you know, he needs to go out with a sales force immediately. And thank you.
You're teaching a class now.
Well, I mean, yeah, we're not a retailing company. We're a furniture platform, right?
As a service.
Yeah, yeah, FAAS, furniture as a service. It's actually not a bad idea. I don't know. I mean, I think that in literature, and certainly as I was becoming educated in marketing, and that's what I've done my entire career, really. I mean, we're management consultants, but we specialize in that particular area. There was not as much of the science part, to be honest. So there were people that were really good at it and people who were not very good at it at all. And you kind of gravitated to one to the other, right? There used to be you know, when I first started, I came out of business school, I went into advertising. You know, there was two things that you could always count on. First of all, everybody knew that they were good marketers and what good advertising was because they watched it on television, right? So that was kind of, you know, back to our hit and myth. And the other thing is you always put a radio commercial on the client's station that they listen driving to work, right? So there was an art to it. There was hardly any science. I think what we see now is that notably in B2B, in this science part where you've got these 5,000 companies, and again, legitimately, some of that is very, very useful, okay? Because marketing in and of itself is a messy process. And it's an uneven, lumpy process. And it has uneven and messy outcomes associated with it. Part of the growth in these kinds of firms is that CMOs are under enormous pressure to show their return on investment. That's why the half-life of a CMO is about, you know, slightly that of a fruit fly. Okay? So you know, that engendering to come to the table, come to the board and saying, this is exactly how we're getting ROI on all of this stuff, that engenders that process. And again, for the salespeople in the room, right, and people, and marketing people in the room, what do you always, well, you got to fill the funnel. You got to fill the funnel. You got to fill the funnel. Well, you gave fuzzy dice away at that trade show. Yeah, those are qualified leads, right? So just you process them, right? Just call them up, right? I mean, that's rubbish. It's just rubbish on the face of it, right? And so that's where the discipline actually, from an academic standpoint, that's where actually companies are now really starting to examine that actual process. The McKinsey guys, not the consultant side, but the McKinsey research is starting to do some really interesting stuff on that. Because, you know, they see the fallacy, long-winded answer here, but they see some of the fallacies associated with that idea.
Who's passing the mic around?
I've got
You
right here.
got-
Hi.
There's one in hand.
I'm
Okay.
Andy from NetApp, and just wanted to talk about or get your input from a perspective of bidirectional marketing, because I think across science and art, it's bidirectional. I think a lot of people see it in a one direction. Paul, right up front, you said, sell more stuff. Well, I would take that further and say, sell more of the right stuff, more of the better stuff, more of the sticky stuff and the high margin stuff.
To the people who want to buy it.
Right, and so your comment about the Twitter feeds, I think is kind of an effort to scale listening, right? That's the science part. Going out and talking to 5 customers who love your product and 5 customers who hate your product is more of the art. So just wanted to get your
Or you know, taking a page out of the Apple book is market your product to the people who actually want it. you know, when we first launched Macintosh, it was a huge failure. Steve wanted that product to be to replace the IBM PC, which had been launched a few months before. And when it went into the market, there isn't a business alive that wanted that product. And what happened is we realized that artists and creative people liked that product. So they started to buy it to use at home, and then they started sneaking it in the back door of the company. And so what happened from marketing perspective at Apple is Steve changed the entire strategy to be the computer for the rest of us, which is what he liked to say, to what I like to say, which is the computer for the best of us. And that changed everything.
Yeah, I recall that vividly. There was a product that I was on the launch team of that, of course, proliferates greatly now through Silicon Valley. The Apple IIc. Does everybody remember the Apple IIc? It was a little compact thing. The battery supply, of course, was about the size of a car battery, but that was, you know, detached from the machine. The Apple IIc, the dirty little secret that nobody wanted to say anything about at Apple was that we sold more Apple IIcs in the first 90 days than Macintosh sold in the first 90 days. And back then, Apple was a factionalized company, right? So that was something we didn't repeat. Where's the Apple IIc today? It came and went because the product itself was not that good, whereas Macintosh was. And Macintosh was built around an idea. The IIc was built around a form factor.
Exactly. The Mac was the next big thing, and the IIc was an evolution of the Apple I. Exactly. So, yeah. But without the Apple II and the IIc, the Mac would have never had the funding to do what it ultimately did.
That's correct, yeah.
Other questions with the mic?
Sure. Hi. This goes back to your comment when you said demand gen is not a technology. But with more and more regulations coming into play, especially things like the GDPR, the global data privacy regulations, companies, I feel, are being pushed to kind of rely on technology more to drive the inbound demand gen or to rely on social media, etc. So what's your comment on that?
Well, people know what the GDPR is. Okay, well, that's a set of regulations within the EU that has to do with the collection and retention of data, and that data coming from customers and how that can be proliferated, sold, or what have you. You're absolutely correct. There has to be technology to cope with some of those kinds of things. There also has to be technology because I think it goes back to this bidirectional notion that you were speaking about earlier, which is there is a lot more ongoing conversation, and that conversation is both bidirectional and it's real time. So marketing at one point was typically a very, very serial effort, right? Very asynchronous type of effort. It's not anymore. It's a very synchronous type of effort. Now, where I would argue is that people are getting drowned in the signal noise problem. Okay? So we're trying to filter out all the noise to get to the signal, and in filtering out all of that noise, we're not paying enough attention to the signal, to Andy's point, about people who are actually predisposed to looking at us and we're looking at them. Right? And that's where I think that the technology, again, it can lead you astray.
You know, just to close on that question, everybody in the world, every company in the world wants their product or service to be all things to all people. You know, I can almost predict walking into a new business meeting and the guy says that we do this, we do this, we do this, we do this, and you know, okay, what you want to do is you want to be all things to all people. Well, yeah, that's what we want to do. We want to walk and chew gum at the same time. But if you're all things to all people, you're nothing to no one. And so you're much better off getting a beachhead with people who like you and like what you're offering, and then push it out from there.
We see a variation of it in the sense that we don't want to be all things to all people. We want to be one thing to one particular person. We just don't want to have to give up anything to be that. So we call it, there's a client malady called, we want to change just so long as it doesn't involve change. Okay? So we want more focus, but don't make us give up anything to get that focus.
You've been waiting there for a question.
Yes, my name is Anne. I work with the Nordic Innovation House in Palo Alto, and we try to connect our startups to expertise here in the Valley. And I was wondering about your views on this, the personas, because now we have workshops with sales and marketing experts that try to teach the startups how to think in terms of personas. So should we just stop doing that, or is it a matter of how many personas you try to keep in mind? If you could just...
We probably both have very strong points of view about personas. Humans are complex individuals, and there's no way to map out exactly what a persona is. Everybody has 100 different facets or millions of facets to who they are, and you can capture their imagination regardless of their persona. So I'm not a big persona fan, but Paul?
Well, I'm a persona fan to the extent that there's utility in it, right? So if I want to describe who I want to go after, it's just as important for me to describe who I do not want to go after. And this is back to my comment about we want to be more focused just so long as we don't have to give anything up. And this leads to persona creep, because the sales guys come in and they say, well, but over here, these guys look like this, right? And therefore, oh, well, let's do personas for that. Now you've got a target audience that has suddenly gone from something that you previously really were targeted, bore-sighted almost, what we call the bullseye of a segment. Now you've got this segment that has, really no, it's amorphous, or it becomes amorphous. And that's where it starts to lose its value. So there is value in doing it. I think the answer is knowing when to stop.
In the world of technology, marketing, and sales, what I believe is that we should be teaching salespeople how to sell the dream or the promise of the product that they're selling. Because in the world of technology, whatever you have today, it's going to do something more tomorrow, and it'll do something more the day after that, and on and on. And what you really want customers to buy into is a belief in your roadmap. That's really what you're selling. You're not selling the widget at the end of the roadmap. And one of the things that I keep telling this company I'm working with is they're selling $8 widgets to guys on the other side with $12 widget budgets. And you can sell $1 million $8 widgets, but you're never going to sell that $1 million platform until you start selling the promise of it, and you get people to buy into the roadmap down the future.
Yeah, I think the particularly nowadays. And this is true stretching back a long way, but now it's really demanded of people. People want to buy outcomes, right? They want to buy the process of getting there.
They want a better life.
They've got other things to do, right? And so when you come in and you have all these features and benefits, and you appear to be really well suited, so says our persona, to doing all of this, and we mistake the notion that, did anybody ever ask this person whether they care or not?
Yeah, we need a mic.
Thank you. My name is Sarah Prosta. I'm starting with PwC next month, and not in marketing. So my question is, all of the, at least last few threads we've been talking about, I feel like it kind of comes down to industrialization of a human process, which maybe is not the best use of industrialization. But I mean, industrialization has done amazing things for develop the middle class by paying them by such high wages, by having such an efficient process that he could, and he wanted them lining up to work for him. But there's a limit, I feel, when it comes to industrialization of the human, and marketing, while it's a strategy, I feel that it's the strategy of interacting with humans and building authenticity, trust. Sales is a bit different. It's a bit trying to fit into someone's lifestyle, if you will. But I guess in terms of this being a question, where do we draw the line? I mean, I know it's obviously depends on many factors, but is there like a point where we draw the line?
Boy, we've got a big future of that ahead of us with all the machine learning stuff. I haven't seen a company in the last year that doesn't have machine learning as a big part of what it's trying to do. But again, what I think humans do really well is we connect dots that other people don't connect, that other people or other systems don't connect. What machines do really well is they identify patterns. So if we can combine pattern recognition with connecting disparate dots, that's what strategy is.
Completely agree. Microphone.
Hi, I'm Rob Mahalko. I consult to startups in marketing and strategy. And I had another question about category design. I'm hearing a lot about that as well. And perhaps I'd be interested in what conditions does it make sense to actually go through a category design and creation exercise? Or if it's not, if you're with a company in a defined market, is it better to spend more time on positioning and just refining your value proposition? Like, what are the conditions where it truly makes sense to go down the effort of creating a category?
You want to take that one?
Yeah, that's a pretty, it's a good question. It's requires more than a simple answer.
But the first answer is you got to have enough money to do it.
Yeah. Category definitions, right, or category defining exercises are good so long as the conditions for your ability to do something about it afterwards. Okay, I mean, otherwise you're stuck in a room with a bunch of people that are just having a whiteboard exercise, right? So category definition takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of money. And oftentimes the category defining exercise all sounds good, and then you take it out, or you don't take it out, and ask real people whether this actually smells and tastes good. A lot of people are afraid of the answer to that. Come back to the more monetary or the more quantitative side. Good reason to do category redefinition is if you have an unmatchable offer that basically is not going to separate you from the rest of the people in your category, or whereby that category is relatively flat. In consumer packaged goods terms, we used to call it getting consumers to rethink their relationship to the category. Sometimes you can do that, other times you can't.
Right. I think, to go back to Trout and Reese, creating a new space in someone's brain is a big effort. It's a very big effort. And so you got to think about that before you get into it. I do have a strategy, though, that I like to use with companies who think they may have a new category, and I actually think they may have a new category, and that's what I call the bundle and breakaway strategy, which is bundle yourself with the guys you want to be bundled with the category that they're in, and then when you're ready, when you actually have a market and you've got traction, then break yourself away and then talk about the category.
Yeah.
I think we have two more questions.
Kevin.
Go ahead. He can go first. Hi, I'm Tej from SAP Ariba. You mentioned about working with Steve Jobs and launching Macintosh back in the 80s. If you were to do it all over again, let's say in Q4 of 2018, what would be your strategy and what would you do different?
Wow, that's a big question because there's so much. The internet is here today, right? And it wasn't here before. The biggest thing we did back then, we learned early on. Steve knew this, and we learned it early on, that if you were gonna fall in love with the Macintosh, you had to touch it. It was just a simple thing. It's like a food. If you're gonna fall in love with a new kind of food, you're gonna have to eat it. So what we tried to do in the 6 months we had to do this was bring as many journalists and analysts and influencers into Apple to touch the product as we possibly could, and we were able to get 100 of them in there. And each one of them had their own full day at Apple. Today, with the internet, we can reach way more than 100 people. But we found the 100 right people, I think, and we're able to give them a hands-on touching experience with the Macintosh, and it made all the difference. So I would find a way to do that online.
Yeah, and I think the similar experience, one of the things that we did, we differentiated Apple on just any number of different dimensions. So Andy just mentioned the product. Obviously, the product was something the world had never seen. They'd seen the piece parts for it, but they'd never seen the product. But they'd never seen a company like Apple as well. Okay? So we were differentiating on business model. We were differentiating on engineering, and we were definitely differentiating on marketing. And one of the reasons why, and this sounds harsh, but you can look backwards. One of the reasons why we were so successful at Apple is because we were differentiated, right? And everybody else wasn't, right? The PC industry consolidated into what it did because most players in it were so terrible at what they did. Okay? Not the engineering side of it, not the product side of it, but everything else associated with that.
It's good to enter a market where everybody else sucks.
Quick question. So in the B2B world, the way we used to deliver our messages to the world, say before the internet, was pretty clear. There were a few magazines, there was press, there were trade shows. We knew what they were. We could measure the effectiveness. Over the last 20 years, every few years, the way we want to deliver those messages, if we can get the art right and we got the message right and we got our positioning right, the way we're delivering those messages and the return on ad spend or whatever that spend is, social media spend, et cetera, has been changing. So today, for both of you, what advice would you give the B2B people in the room as to where do you spend your money to get the highest return on that investment?
So I'll give you a quick answer on that. What you're trying to do is build the largest digital footprint that you possibly can afford. And we have available to us today 3 channels, owned, earned, and paid, right, in order to do that. If you don't have any money for paid, you can do a whole lot with owned and earned. And the idea is to get your narrative. I'll just say one other thing about this. It's not just a digital footprint of stories about your company. Those are nice, but that's not the way to do it. You have to have viral memes integrated into those stories. And they have to be repeated in every story. So whether you're writing a story about the manufacturing of your product or the customers or it's a case study or whatever, you need to have this series of memes that are going to connect to each other so that when somebody searches for your company, those memes are going to pop up in every format. And Jeff is doing this over at SAP, which is really, really a cool thing. He calls it the Corporate Newsroom, right? And I was calling it the Corporate News Bureau, but the idea is you've got to be in charge of your own news broadcasting, and it has to contain these viral memes.
And I would say, before you even get to that point, I would say you've got to understand the essence of what it is that you're providing to the marketplace. What is the overriding value and relevance that you're developing, and how are you then going to communicate what that is? But if you don't have this real visceral understanding of why, you belong in this universe, then you're missing a huge source of something to write about.
Yeah, start with knowing who you are.
Yeah.
I think that's
great.
That's the end. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. You two are legends in the industry. You've helped so many people and companies to be successful, and you're continuing to do that. We really appreciate your generosity of heart and spirit in coming out and talking with us this morning. As a very small token of our appreciation, we have for both of you the Churchill Club speaker T-shirt. We hope you wear that in very, very, very good health. Now, there are 2 ways that you can access the content from this presentation. One of them is that Paul and Andy actually put together a slide deck with some of the information that you heard and then expanding on that. So if you would like to receive that slide deck, simply give me or one of my colleagues your card or your contact information with the word yes on it. We will know that that is then for that purpose, and you will receive the deck. The second way is that a recording of this program will be made available on our Churchill Club YouTube channel. It will take a little bit of time since we're recording this in a law firm. It has to go through an approval process, so it might be a week or so before you see it up there, but you will find recordings of most of our other programs there as well. Hope you find that to be a very useful resource. 2 more post-event announcements here. One is that next month, actually, we have coming up the chairman of NBC Universal, Jeff Shell, as well as a program on voice that we're working on, and then we have one on the geospatial topic in April. So there are a lot of great things coming up. We hope that you'll join us for those things. And then one other thing I wanted to tell you, did you know that we have a speaker coach in residence here at Churchill Club? His name is Dennis Sakamoto, and he happens to be here in the audience. Dennis, just raise your hand if you wouldn't mind. He's here as a resource for us and for all of you if you want to talk with him about speaking issues, communication issues, so I wanted to point that out. Now, you have been a wonderful audience. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day. See you next time.